time. Hello, everyone. It's so great to have you all here. We are so excited and delighted to be here with you all today. We appreciate you taking time out this Thursday to join us. I'm loving all the introductions already occurring in the chat. But on behalf of Learning Heroes and the Oak Foundation, we'd like to welcome you all in to our presentation of The Parent Journey, Cracking the Code for Families of Children with Learning Differences. We'd also like to give a special thanks to Edge Research for conducting the research. So what are we going to be doing today? Today, we will explore how some parents have, quote, cracked the code in navigating complex systems and processes on behalf of their children, discuss opportunities to support more families, and we will have a chance to share parent perspectives on their individual journeys. This will reveal new national research findings from parents with K through 12 children who learn differently. So again, we're going to be in for lots of insight today. Please, please, please engage with us. We want this to be a conversation with you all and not to you all. But before we get started, we do have a few quick housekeeping notes that we wanted to share. Slides are available and the webinar will be recorded, which you guys heard when we heard the webinar was being recorded. And it will also be later posted. So if you feel like you missed anything, do not worry. We will, of course, make sure you have access to it. Our chat function is enabled for questions and reflections. So if there's an aha moment or anything that inspires you or something you learn, please feel free to share that in the chat. We also have our Q&A function in the chat if you have questions that occur throughout. And we will also have a Q&A function at the end of today's webinar for you all to get your questions in and get your questions answered by some of today's special panelists. Also, just know that we will be monitoring the chat for all questions that you have, and we are going to try to get to as many questions as possible, but we'll also be sure to follow up on any that we don't get to on the webinar. We want to make sure each and every one of your questions are answered. And now we are ready to get things started. And you can't go wrong when you start a webinar, right? With Justin Timberlake and some good music. So now I'm going to turn it over to Learning Heroes founder and president, Miss Bib Hubbard. Bib, I'd like to bring you on.
Thank you so much, Kelsey, and thank you all for joining us here this afternoon. We're super excited just to share the data with you. But before diving into the data, we can go to the next slide. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Learning Heroes, just want to give you a brief overview. Our mission is simple. It's to support parents and caregivers as their child's most effective education advocate. And we do that by conducting research around the connections, the relationships between families and schools. And we take that data and we create content, training, tools, resources for both families and educators to be able to create trusting relationships, which we believe is an essential condition for student success. So that is a little bit about Learning Heroes. And so, but I'm really pleased now to introduce our colleague, our friend, the instigator of this incredible body of research, Bethiel Girma-Holton. She's the program officer at the Oak Foundation who is supporting this research. And she's going to take us through a little bit of context and the perspective from the Oak Foundation. And we're just so grateful for your leadership in this space, Bethiel. So I'm going to turn it to you.
Thank you so much, Bib. I'm so happy to be here and so happy to see so many of you join us. Like Bib mentioned, my name is Bethiel and I'm a program officer at Oak Foundation. And I'll start with sharing some background on our work. Oak is a family foundation focused on many areas of global concern. I work in the education program, which focuses on students with learning differences. Next slide. Our work is grounded in educational equity. So we focus on students with learning differences who experience additional adversity due to racism and poverty. Next slide. Our definition of learning differences is here. We focus specifically on learning disabilities like dyslexia and neurological processing challenges like ADHD. And we support in our program many different issue areas that are important to better supporting students with learning differences like SEL and early literacy, among many others. Last year in 2022, we hoped to launch a parent strategy and quickly realized that there was a lot more to learn about the specific experiences of parents of students with learning differences. So we partnered with Learning Heroes, who have been amazing partners in helping us define our learning questions and create a really robust research methodology and process to help us get better information. And we hope that this research will help not only us make better decisions about how we can better support parents of students with learning differences, but we're very excited to share it with the field and hopefully help all of you and your organizations better understand the experiences of parents with learning differences. I'm really excited to dig into this piece of information that we have to share with you today. And again, thank you for being here. Bib, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Bethiel. So now we're going to delve into the research, and I'm super excited to give a little bit of context before I turn it to Pam Loeb, who's going to go through the data. So as you can see here, we had some research objectives. In the macro, we wanted to understand the journey that families face and embark upon as they're working to support their child with learning differences. So specifically, you can see here, areas around the identification and evaluation. Who do parents and families turn to for those supports? And then importantly, where are the opportunities for us in the field to better support these families? So those were some of the big themes that we touched upon that you'll see in the data. So next slide. And as I mentioned earlier, this is an incredibly robust and rich body of research. Again, thank you to the Oak Foundation. You can see here we have 5 phases. We're in phase 3. So phase 1, we did a landscape scan because we wanted to know what evidence already existed and build upon that as opposed to recreating the wheel. And we also talked to 8 experts across the country, and I'll show you their names in a moment. And we're just incredibly grateful to them. And they truly helped shape the data around what data didn't already exist that would be most helpful. And then that led to phase 2, where we conducted 16 in-depth interviews, and that's basically a one-on-one conversation with parents, both in English and in Spanish, who have children who have been diagnosed with a learning difference, but also parents who suspect their child might have a learning difference, but have not yet been diagnosed. And those 2 bodies of research informed the phase that we're at now, where we conducted a quantitative survey of parents. And again, Pam's going to go into the details on that. And then at the end of the webinar, I will touch on phase 4 and phase 5. So finally, and these are our field experts. Again, we were just really grateful for the time that they gave us to help shape and inform. And then before turning it over to Pam, just want to talk a little bit about what we mean by cracking the code. You'll see in the data there emerged, for those families who have a diagnosis for their child, they seem to have greater satisfaction in their schools. Their children are having access to more services, or having greater communications. So these themes emerged as we were going through the data that we wanted to just have for you in the back of your head as Pam is going through it. So that's sort of the broader context of what we mean by cracking the code. With that, I'm going to just dive right in and introduce my colleague Pam Loeb from Edge Research. She's principal at Edge Research, and both is brings an incredible amount of professional expertise to this topic, but also personal expertise. And so we're just so pleased that Pam partnered with us on this. So Pam, I'm going to let you take it away.
Oops. Thank you so much, Bib. So I'm just going to get right into the data. As Bib said, this is a multi-phase research project, but most of what I'm going to talk about today is from the survey phase. So just a brief description of how the survey was deployed and who we talked to. First, we deployed a nationally representative survey of parents, and then we screened them to ensure that they had at least one child who had been diagnosed or they suspect has a learning difference. And Bethiel already kind of shared the definition that we used with you. In addition to the national sample, we also conducted oversamples of all of the major racial and ethnic groups to make sure that we could look at meaningful differences across those groups. And all told, almost 3,000 parents participated in the survey. As Bib mentioned, it was offered in both English and Spanish. It was in the field kind of at the end of last year, October through November. And as we go through, a visual cue is if numbers are in blue, it's significantly higher than other audiences. Red is significantly lower. So just a little bit about the parents who responded. And what we see on this slide is the percentage who have a child who has been either diagnosed or they suspect has each of the different learning differences that we asked about. And I think of no surprise. Yep.
I'm so sorry. The slides aren't showing. We can't see them.
Oh, dear. Okay. Hold on one second.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay. So I am going to do this again. And here we go. How about now?
Beautiful.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Embarrassing, but anyway, thank you all. So what we have here, just to explain again, is basically the percentage of parents who say that their child has been either diagnosed or they suspect have each of the different learning differences that we drilled down on. And what you can see here, and I think probably of no surprise to those who are on the line, is that the largest number report that their child has either been diagnosed or they suspect has ADD or ADHD. Among that group, about half have another learning difference. And then there are also some people who just report their child having one or two different learning differences. Kind of the average number of learning differences reported is just about 2. In addition, we asked parents if their child experiences anxiety or depression. This was not part of the definition, but we had 61% of parents who said that their child experiences either anxiety and or depression, 26% who say both. So there's definitely this mental health tie-in that we're going to be talking about as we go through the slides. Here's a little bit about the demographics of the audiences that we spoke with. If we kind of look at the upper left-hand corner, there actually were not a lot of demographic differences with parents generally versus those who have children with learning differences in terms of race and ethnicity. The only group that under-indexed on reporting that their child has a learning difference were Hispanic parents. And interestingly, among Asian American parents, they were actually more likely to say that they suspect their child has learning difference versus have a diagnosis. The opposite was true with Caucasian parents. And then if we kind of scroll to the right-hand side of the slide here, we also wanted to understand parents' personal experiences. So we asked if either they or a family member has a learning difference. A little over half said yes. And again, you can see that there are some racial and ethnic differences. Hispanic and Asian American parents are less likely to say somebody in the family has a known learning difference. So let's get into the journey of cracking the code. And it's not necessarily easy, intuitive, or quick. So we broke it down into phases, starting with who was the first person to identify that your child might have a developmental and/or learning difference. The majority of people who took the survey said it was them or another parent, kind of followed by teachers at 30%, and then pediatricians and school counselors at small numbers at 9% and 5%. What was, however, interesting is that those who say a professional was the first to identify that their child might have a learning difference are more likely to say that they have gotten a diagnosis. So something for us to think about. And among parents who were not the first to identify that their child might have a learning difference, acceptance is mixed. We had a little bit less than half who said that they believed or accepted it immediately, and a little more than half who said it took them a while, a long time, or they're still not sure if they believe or accept the fact that their child might have a learning difference. But those who said that a pediatrician was the first to bring this up were much more likely to say that they accepted and believed it immediately. And this is one of our first data points that just kind of underlines how important pediatricians are in cracking the code. So thinking about this idea of acceptance, as we were conducting our in-depth interviews, parents shared with us their stories about this point in their journey and how difficult it was. This is a quote from one parent who I think really kind of sums up what we heard from others. And she talks about the fact that when her son started school, she felt like she was being judged. She also felt this tremendous sense of guilt, even though she knew that this was not something that she had caused. She was lost. She was overwhelmed. She felt like teachers were looking at her, asking why she couldn't control her child. And she just didn't know how to fix and help him. In the survey, we asked about a number of different concerns that parents had at these early stages. And you can see here that parents are wrestling with a lot of fears and anxieties at the start of their journey. First, they're concerned about the immediate impact on their child. Will it impact their ability to succeed in school, their stress and anxiety level, their happiness and emotional well-being? And then they're also almost as worried about long-term consequences. What is this going to mean for my child and his or her ability to succeed in life? If you look to the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see a few call-outs. And when we look at some of the racial and ethnic differences among parents of children with learning differences, you can see that Hispanic and Asian American parents tend to be more concerned about a variety of the issues that we asked about in the survey. For instance, much more concerned that their child won't be able to go to college, and Asian American parents much more likely to feel as if they did something wrong or somehow it was their fault. You'll also see in this slide that 7 out of 10 parents were concerned about their child being labeled as different. And, we know labels and words are important. So in the survey, we asked people, which of the following terms do you prefer to use when thinking about your child? Parents were split between learning challenges and learning differences. About 2 in 10 preferred the term learning disability, and far fewer parents preferred terms like neurodiverse or learning variability. But what was interesting was the difference between those who have a diagnosis for their child. They tend to prefer learning differences or learning disabilities. And those without a diagnosis prefer learning challenges, which I think is just something to keep in mind as we communicate with parents at different phases of their journey. So the next phase that we looked at was evaluation and diagnosis. And when we asked parents how confident they were in knowing what to do once they kind of suspected that their child has a learning difference, only 2 in 10 said they felt extremely confident. Another 3 in 10 said very confident. Again, we can see that there's a big difference between those with a diagnosis and those who suspect. So there is a confidence gap going on there. And just 2 in 10 said it was very easy to figure out where and how to get an evaluation. Of the parents who took this survey, about 2/3 have had some type of evaluation. And among the third who haven't, a little over half plan to, and then others either are not sure yet or are just not going to go there. And when we ask those two groups, what's preventing you from getting an evaluation? Number one, I'm just not sure my child has a learning difference and needs to be evaluated. Maybe they'll outgrow their behavior, or maybe they just need to try harder in school. We also see here that another barrier is around being labeled. And then this knowledge gap. I don't know where or how to get an evaluation. The other thing that we see in this data is that among the group that is planning on getting an evaluation, 3/4 of them say it's been 6 months or more since somebody first suspected that their child has a learning difference. And what we heard in our qualitative research is that, children lose months, if not in the case of this parent, a whole year going by before their child was formally evaluated. And you can see in this quote here kind of the guilt that this parent felt if he had just pushed the school a little bit more, kind of forced an evaluation, then his daughter would have, gotten medication. She might have gotten better grades. She needed to be tested sooner. Among those who have had an evaluation, about a third say that it was very easy to understand. We have majorities who are kind of somewhere in the middle, and just 8% who said it was really difficult. But of those 8%, they are more likely to be Spanish speakers. So we see that there's a language gap here, as well as lower income. And when we ask parents what would have made the evaluation easier to understand, of no surprise, if you had used plain English, layman's terms, and if instead of just handing me the results, you would have explained exactly what this means for my family and what I need to do about it. So in terms of who parents trust to help support their child, themselves, and their family, number one on the list are pediatricians. 7 out of 10 parents say that they trust pediatricians a lot in helping them and their child with his or her developmental or learning differences. And this is true across every single subgroup, every single demographic subgroup that we looked at. After that, it's other family members and then children's teachers. And these are some of the messengers that who can really help communicate to parents how important an evaluation is. So one of the things that we asked in the survey was, in which of the following ways do you think having an evaluation can or has helped you and your child? And what we see here is the difference between those who've gotten an evaluation and those who have not. And here we see that there is kind of a knowledge and awareness gap from everything to, your child will, the school and teachers will have more information on how to help your child, to getting more individualized instruction and extra attention, more accommodations on test, even access to mental health support and free resources from the school. So I'm going to stop there and I'm going to hand it back over to Kelsey.
Thank you so much, Pam. Truly appreciate all the insight that you shared. And it's great to see everyone commenting in our chat. Please continue to do so. And while you do that, I am super excited now to welcome on Jeannie Humphrey. Jeannie is someone I've had a chance to get to know over the past couple of weeks as someone who applied to our family advisory board. But beyond that, Jeannie Humphrey is a parent advocate. She volunteers with the New Mexico PTA and the New Mexico PED Family Advisory. She's also the proud mom of 3 wonderful boys, one of whom has a learning difference. Jeannie, welcome. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Kelsey.
Awesome to have you here. So let's get into it. So I know from getting a chance to know you, you told me all about Jesse, but for our listening audience today, can you tell me a bit about Jesse and how you've been able to navigate his learning difference?
Sure. So Jesse is my oldest. He's 12 years old, about to be 13. So I noticed that Jesse had some type of learning difference starting in kindergarten when he frustrated his teacher to no end. She didn't quite realize it, but he did teach himself how to read, but he never paid attention to her. So to her, she thought he was just being difficult and obstinate and lazy, but he was actually doing well academically, but the great thing is I have parents who are both educators. My dad worked as a CODA as a transition coordinator for the schools, and my mom is a retired teacher and now teaches for private schools. So they were able to kind of give me the words to use to kind of go talk to the teachers about some of the issues. And over the years, we've had various teachers who maybe been more on board with helping Jesse and some who haven't. But it's almost exactly the same every time I go to a parent-teacher conference. They say he's very intelligent, but he doesn't pay attention. He gets distracted a lot. And, his father and I get very frustrated with him because something as simple as getting dressed in the morning can be a huge deal. He doesn't like the way certain clothes feel. He forgets what he's doing. Even this morning at 12 years old, on his way to his backpack I had just told him to put away a notebook, he got distracted because he also had to go change different shoes and forgot to put stuff in his backpack. So that's pretty much was the clue. Plus my parents being teachers, my mom had learned last year about executive function disorder. And she's like, I think this is what he has, because we all noticed that it was a struggle for Jesse. So that's pretty much how we've been noticing since kindergarten.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, about Jesse and just digging a little deeper into Jesse. I know that you shared with me that you guys didn't seek an official diagnosis. So I'd love to have for the listening audience, why didn't, and what are the exact reasons why you all didn't seek an official diagnosis? And is diagnosis in your plans for the future?
Okay, yeah, sure. Um, At first, he was meeting all of his academic milestones. He's very intelligent, so I think that helped him to really cope and to be able to catch up, because what he could read on his own, if he wasn't paying attention to the teacher, he could make up for it. And everybody knew he had potential. So even when he wasn't getting good grades, they could tell he was learning. And so it was like, well, that's okay. We'll just keep moving along. Around fourth grade was when it started to kind of become more stressful for him and for us. And so we were starting to head down that road, and then the pandemic happened. And so everything shut down. You couldn't see a doctor hardly to save your life, much less to get a diagnosis. And so we put it on hold. But I also kind of got a front row seat to see all of his struggles as I was helping him online learn. And so I actually, when he was in sixth grade, I homeschooled him. And a friend of mine had told me about her daughter having very similar issues. And she recommended that I go see a specialist. And so I was very excited to do that. But then my husband was like, but I don't want him to have stigma. I don't want him to be put in special ed. I don't want him to feel like he has a disability. So I kind of hesitated there. And it is very difficult to get in to see practitioners. And so I've really just kept holding off on it.
Just following up on that, you did mention that your husband is concerned about the stigma. And I think probably everyone on this call can probably agree, there is a stigma, unfortunately, that kind of exists out there. So can you say a little bit more about that and kind of how you all work together, though, to support Jesse?
Yeah, and so my husband is extremely supportive of Jesse, and so he's always there for him. He talks to him, encourages him. Of course, he frustrates us, but at the same time, he looks towards his future and doesn't want this to hurt him as far as what Jesse feels like his abilities are. If he has a label, I think a lot of it comes from when we were children and kids were taken out for special ed and they were labeled and they were different. But the two of us, like especially after me talking to you in these interviews, I think I feel a lot more confidence, and I even have the information of an occupational therapist who can maybe get me the diagnosis. And so now my husband is on board, but he was definitely hesitant at first because he didn't want that label on our son.
Completely understandable, but excited now that you guys are moving forward, and I know it's only going to support Jesse. Jeannie, thank you so much for your time on behalf of everyone on this webinar. It's always great to put a voice to the great research. And now I will be turning it back over to Pam.
Great, thank you. Okay, now let's hope that I can figure out how to share my screen this time. So give me a second here. There we go. I think it worked. So we are going to move on, and we are going to dig into how families are accessing school supports. And we asked parents to talk to us about, which of the following supports you're receiving from school. These are all of the supports that you see here on the left-hand side. Actually, 78% told us that they're receiving some type of support. Of no surprise, more likely to be receiving supports if you have an evaluation. And interestingly, the younger your child is diagnosed, the more likely your child is to receive services. So we then went on to ask parents, how would you rate your school in helping your child with his or her developmental and or learning differences? About a quarter, or maybe a little bit less than a quarter, give their schools an A or excellent. Another third say, B or very good, and the rest would just give their school a C, a D, or a failing grade. And if you look to the right, again, there is a big gap between parents who have a diagnosis for their child and those who still suspect that their child has a learning difference, a 10-point gap. We also see that parents of elementary school students are more likely to rate their schools as excellent versus those who have children in middle or high school. So just drilling down into the various services that we asked about a little bit more. At the bottom of the page, you see each of the various services that I showed you a couple of slides earlier, the percentage of parents who say their child is receiving each of those. And at the top of the slide, we have the percentage of parents who say that that particular accommodation is very helpful. So you can see that there's really not one service that any more than about a quarter of parents say their child receives, but the vast majority, up to kind of 80%, say that each of the services are very helpful. And looking at the bottom of the slide, if we break this out by parents who rate their school as excellent in supporting their child, these parents are more likely to receive many of the different services that we asked about, and their child is receiving more services than those who don't rate their school as excellent. So hence the title, more services equals greater satisfaction. We also wanted to understand what services families are getting outside of school. And a little bit less than half of families, 48%, said that they are paying for outside services. The most common, mental health support, and then, kind of academic supports like tutoring. Where we saw the biggest differences in terms of paying for services versus not is of no surprise by income, and this is true across all racial and ethnic groups. Yet at the same time, 40% of low-income parents who are SNAP eligible say that they're paying for some type of service outside of school. And among that SNAP eligible group, the average amount that parents report paying is about $200 a month, which is, around $2,500 a year, which is a big burden. The last section I'm going to share with you is around how we can improve communications between parents, schools, and other service providers outside of school. And one of the positive things that we saw in this survey is that parents of children with learning differences, the vast majority say that they are communicating with school in a variety of different ways, whether it be through the school portal, emails, texts, even phone calls. Large numbers of parents say that they are communicating with the school about their child's learning difference on a regular basis. And we even have 85% of parents who say that they're attending parent-teacher conferences where they can discuss this in more detail a few times a year. This is by far very helpful at 71%. Parents who say they communicate regularly, again, are more likely to rate their school as excellent in helping their child with learning differences. And we also see that parents who are communicating regularly with paraeducators are particularly happy. So again, another key support group, paraeducators who are helpful in cracking the code. At the same time, when we ask parents how comfortable they are talking to school about their child's learning differences, 68% say they're very comfortable contacting school about academic concerns, but only 58% that they say they're very comfortable contacting school about social, emotional, or mental health concerns. So a big gap here, and something that's important to address given the large number of children who have anxiety or depression. The last slide I'm going to share with you is around opportunities. And we probed on a number of potential ideas on how to bridge the gap between school and home. And we asked parents about a variety of different potential interventions. In light blue, you see the percentage who say that they already have or are doing each of these. In dark blue, you see the percentage who say they're not, but they're interested. And you can see that there's a lot more interest than people who are doing each of these already, whether it be just getting more concrete ways you can help your child at home, to a parent guide on age-appropriate academic, social, and emotional milestones and indicators, to even training programs or parent support groups that help you as a parent help your child and better advocate for them, to connecting pediatricians and mental health providers with school and home to get a more holistic approach to your child's needs. So these are some important opportunities that we looked at. Be able to talk about these a little bit more, but I want to turn it back to Kelsey to talk to a couple of other parents about their experiences.
Yes, thank you so much, Pam, again, for all of the great insights that you're sharing. And as Pam mentioned, we now want to bring on 2 more parents, to put this in real perspective from parents who are actually going through this right now with their kids. So I'm going to invite them to join me on stage. And first, I'm so excited to be joined by Anya Wallace. First off, Anya, how are you today? Thank you so much for joining.
I am so good. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. It's great to see you again. I'm also joined by Susan Reynolds. Susan, how are you?
I am doing well. I'm just going to keep myself muted for this moment because I know you're talking to Anya
Yep,
first. You look
that's
beautiful, my
perfect.
friend.
Thank you so much, Susan. So do all of you ladies. And yes, Anya, I want to quickly do an introduction for you and then we'll get started in the interview. So just for background, Anya Wallace is a mother of 12 with 2 of her little ones having special abilities. Back in 2018, Anya was connected to the Center of Transforming Lives, where she was honored as a Parent Advocate of the Year in 2022. Today, Anya is an advocate for children with special needs, advocating for better protection for birthing students and seeking safe and equitable school practices while informing and educating parents of their rights since 2015. So again, Anya, super excited to be here with you. And to kick it off, I want to talk about Johnny Frank. And I know he's one of your little ones. I want to talk to you about, how did you first notice that your child, Johnny Frank, had a learning difference?
So for my family with Johnny Frank, I had a very difficult birth with him. And so we were already informed that at some point he would be diagnosed with a learning disability. We didn't know at what point, but we knew around about age 4 or 5 to start looking for those signs. And lucky for us, I have a daughter who is autistic, who is right above Johnny Frank. And seeing her signs and going through everything with her gave me the skill set to kind of watch out for those red flags, to know what to talk to my pediatrician and even his preschool about.
Right. You talked about the red flags and talked to his preschool about. I know in our prior conversations, you mentioned also that you have a daughter that has been diagnosed with autism, Nyla Rose. And so I also want to talk about Nyla. How did you go about navigating support for Nyla Rose to help you figure out how to best support Johnny Frank?
So because of Rose's diagnosis, she received hers very early at 18 months, and kind of navigating the services that were available, and at that time wasn't very many. It was a difficult road, and then now having a second child with special abilities, it's made it a lot easier because I knew who to call, I knew what to say, I knew what the right terminology was when talking to the school and when talking to the pediatricians.
Right. So you had been through it before, essentially, right? And that helped you with your next child, be a little bit more obviously just educated, right? And the next steps that you could take as a parent advocate. Following up on that, I know we have parents on this webinar. We also have a lot of people on this webinar that work very closely with parents and families. So following up on that, do you have any advice for any other parents who might be in a similar situation, such as yourself?
So my biggest advice to parents that may be in a similar situation is, if you see anything that you may feel is a difference with your child, it's okay. Ask the questions. Um, Say something. And the second is, if you are a parent who has a child who has a diagnosis, or maybe it's not diagnosed yet, it's okay. It's not a reflection of you. It's not even a reflection of your child, because I have 2 very special little ones who have proven time and time again that despite their diagnosis, that they have continued to not only reach milestones but be so far beyond that. You just have to take a different road sometimes, and it's okay.
I love that. You just have to take a different road sometimes, and it's okay. Notice the red flags and don't be afraid to speak out. Anya, thank you so much for joining us, and truly appreciate your time and sharing your story with all of us here today.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Anya. All right, Susan, you are next in line. Let me give a brief introduction and then we will get into our interview. So Susan Reynolds has spent most of her life in the U.S. military community. As a child, Susan herself was diagnosed with 2 learning disabilities and ADHD. Susan and her husband are raising a child with learning disabilities and ADHD and are currently navigating the special education system. Today, Susan works on behalf of people with disabilities through advocacy and organizing with the National Center for Learning Disabilities. Susan, just to get into it, tell us how your own journey with learning disabilities impacted your journey with Ian.
Well, for me, we knew something was going to happen, right? And because I was considered a geriatric pregnancy, which is a horrendous term, I actually went through genetic counseling. And so I sat down and we looked at the family tree, and I mean, you could just see it, the rows and rows, the branches leading upward of people on my side of the family in particular who have learning disabilities and ADHD. I would have actually been shocked if he didn't have a learning disability or ADHD. I don't know if I would have known what to do, to be honest. But I wanted to make sure that my son did not have the educational experiences that I had, which were not great. I received absolutely no supports, no services. nothing in school until the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. I was the first person in my high school to receive ADA accommodations for the SAT. So I wanted him to have, I wanted it for everything to be better for him, right?
And I think that's what most parents want, right? A better tomorrow for their
Yeah,
children, right?
exactly.
So appreciate you sharing that about your little one, Ian. And then just going back to your background, how did the military support your family with Ian's learning disability?
So the military has a program called the Exceptional Family Member Program, and it's an enrollment, it's a mandatory enrollment program that did not exist when I was a military kid. And what it does is this program, you enroll your family member who has a variety of either healthcare issues, from severe food allergies, believe it or not, to asthma, to autism, cancer, learning disabilities, you name it, everything falls under this umbrella of EFMP. And the Department of Defense then hopefully can find a base that can meet the family's needs, right? Again, this did not exist when I was a kid. It was just like, oh, your kid has asthma. We'll try not to send you to, I don't know, pick a place that's bad for someone with asthma, right? So what they do though, is they have this program that really supports families, and they really, really research information, right? Because it's the Department of Defense. It has to be well researched if they're going to put their seal of approval on anything. So that's the most important part, right? Is that you have this well-researched, vetted, quality information being handed over to you from not only medical personnel, but overall family support personnel. And that is huge, right? That access to supports and services and resources is a huge component.
Yeah, having that, like you said, access to those supports and resources. I think that's what most people would want, that information is there, but being actually handed it. Again, just going back to the advice piece for any other parents that might be in a similar situation as yourself with your son, Ian, or such as you were in, as you're learning through your learning difference, what advice would you have for them?
I would say get that diagnosis. I remember when I was a kid, I've been thinking about this question all day today. When I was a kid and I did not have my diagnoses yet, and how unbelievably frustrating it was. And I knew, right? I wasn't a kid that didn't know these things. I was a kid that did know these things. I knew I was learning differently. I knew I was falling behind, and I was frustrated, and I was a pretty angry kid because of it. And I did not want my son to go through that. So I'm glad I got him that diagnosis. It gave us a path forward. That's the biggest thing, is all of a sudden we had answers, there were solutions, and we were moving forward. And it was like, oh, okay, well, here's all these laws that now start to protect him. They protect me as parents, and it's amazing to have.
So great to hear you still talk, just so positively now, about the experience and just having that support. And I think that gives hope to other parents, out there who might be in a similar situation. Susan, thank you so much for your time. And again, for giving us insight into Ian's life and your family's life. Best wishes to you in the future.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you so much, Susan. And now I'm going to be turning it back over to Bib Hubbard.
Hey, Bib, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm totally on mute. Sorry. Okay, hang on. So can you hear me now, right?
Yes,
we can hear you. We can hear
you. Okay. Sorry. So thank you, Susan and Anya and Jenny. It's your comments and stories and experiences are amazing and so helpful to us, and really bring this research to life in an important way. And thank you to all of you who are lighting up the chat. It's been awesome to get your take, your experiences, and it's been fun to see some friends who are joining us. So now we're going to dig into some of the questions. We've gotten a lot of really thoughtful, important questions. So I am going to toggle to those, and then Pam, most of them are kind of methodological and many are for you. Yep. I'm going to take the first one, if I can get to it, from a longtime friend of mine. So John Bartoloni, thank you for joining us. It's wonderful to see your name. So John had a really, I think, an important question that, will benefit many. He says he's the proud uncle, a great uncle of 3 girls and 1 boy. And I want to know about the resources available to help them grow. And so, John, we have on our website at bealearninghero.org a plethora of resources for families and for children. And we also, in addition to our resources, we curate other organizations' resources like understood.org and other great places with lots of helpful, good information. So encourage you and folks to check out bealearninghero.org, and you'll find many good resources for families. So it's fun to see your name. And then Pam, I'm just going to kind of roll through some of these methodological ones.
Yeah, and I can answer. I can just address them since I've read them as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to just dive in then? Okay.
So first,
Great.
I think somebody, because I messed up my slides, which is, that sometimes happens. I'm not the most technologically capable, asked about how we define learning differences. And this is based on Oak Foundation's definition of learning differences. Bethiel actually shared this slide. So you can see what parents read in the survey. And the definitions that we gave them for dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, etc. Somebody asked about how we define executive function disorder. We actually did not. This is what they saw. So hopefully that's answer to one of the first questions. Another person asked about the sample size and if the sample size was large enough to really dig into regional differences as well as state differences. Definitely large enough to look at things by region. In terms of state, we probably only have enough completes in the largest states like California, Texas, and New York. And we really didn't drill down by state. We don't see a lot of regional differences across the board. Where we do see differences is where people live, if they live in an urban, suburban, or rural area. And, where we kind of see some deficits are more likely to be in those small town and rural areas. And we heard that in our qualitative as well. One person also asked if we saw big differences by the type of school that the child attends. We actually only conducted the survey among parents of children who are in either traditional public schools or public charter schools. And because that was the group that the Oak Foundation and Learning Heroes was interested in. There are really not a lot of differences actually between those two types of parents who have children in those two types of schools. But we didn't have any private school or parochial school parents in the survey. So those are some of the methodology questions that I saw in here.
And there's another one that just popped up from Benjamin Siegel in the chat that's super interesting and one that we've been actually talking quite a bit about. And I don't know if Bethiel, if you want to come into this conversation too, but if pediatricians, just the fact that they test so what, parents really trust them. And about 25% of parents in schools have been able to collaborate with both. What would it take to improve the situation? So how do we get more, greater collaboration between pediatricians and schools, given how trusted they are? So I think that's something we've been thinking about. And then also just the connection, we saw that, there was an appetite for families who want to connect the dots between the mental health of their children and what's happening at school. So what's happening out of school, what's happening in school as it relates to their mental health was also an issue, sort of the connecting of the dots. So I don't know, Bethiel, if you've, from the Oak Foundation, how you guys have been thinking about some of these issues that have been emerging through the data.
Yeah, thank you, Bib, and thank you for those great questions from the chat. On the mental health question, that's a really big priority for us right now at the foundation. A few years ago, members of the team conducted a landscape scan looking at the intersections of mental health challenges and students with learning differences. And we really found that there's not a lot of information or research. There's some evidence that suggests students with dyslexia and ADHD may be at higher risk for depression and anxiety, but really there's a lot of space in the field, I think, to explore that more. We've actually just last month launched an RFP really specifically focused on the intersections of SEL, mental health, and students with learning differences. And so we really hope to find some new partners who can help us explore that. And on the question of the pediatricians, I think that's a big question for us to explore. I don't have any answers on that. If anyone out there in the chat who's participating knows of organizations that are looking at connecting pediatricians to better support students with learning differences, we would love to hear about it. We were also very compelled by the information, the data that came back from parents that pediatricians are such trusted sources of information. So we think that's a huge opportunity potentially for the field.
Thank you. And actually, Susan, I think there's a question in here for you related to the military. Just does the military make this research and information available more publicly? So that might be an easy, quick one. You know
They tend not to, because of I think that we know that a lot of these sources are sources that I think just about anyone can use, right? But they tend to also create their own sources as well. And, or at least they used to. My husband's been retired for a couple of years now. So, but I don't see a lot of the information that we're given has been made public. We tend to look at what's going on in the civilian world and try to mirror that, believe it or not. So I think we've looked at, we find a lot of information just by looking at, school district websites, believe it or not. I mean, because all the information is already there, because there has to be transparency, right?
Thank you. And there's another question, Bethiel, for you here. Your perspective. Do you think that, where did it go? I just lost it in the chat. That I guess the earlier diagnosis around dyslexia will make, a difference. The state laws regarding universal screening for dyslexia are going to make a difference. Because given the importance of getting that diagnosis, as we've seen in the research, I think it's, the person's connecting those dots.
I think this is not my area expertise on the team, but I would say I do think we do think that will make a big difference. And there are so few states right now that have state laws, or they're so kind of early or nascent that we're really looking to see what the data says once they're implemented with fidelity across states. But I think we have a hypothesis that it will make a big difference for parents and students.
Yeah. And then I think there was just a plug also in the chat to do some more research among pediatricians to sort of better understand their capacities and capabilities in terms of, beyond identifying, but being able to work with families who have children who learn differently. So let's see, what else do we have here? Pam, I'm sure there are a couple that we've.
There was one question. There was one question that somebody asked about additional supports that families receive, free resources that families have access to. And we did ask a question about that in the survey. In fact, of the different supports that parents said they received from their school, the lowest number was that my child qualifies for free resources and help from school. So just 30% of parents whose child has an evaluation said that they were aware of those resources. Only 18% of those who have not had a child evaluated. And we actually also, one of the slides that we did not include just because of time, we did ask a follow-up question about out of school time activities that children with learning differences participate in and how helpful they are in just, helping children cope, whether it be academic resources or, just sports, which was, the most common. And all of those out of school time resources are deemed very helpful by a vast majority of parents whose children participate in them.
Great. The other one that I think is an important one for us, someone said, will you be making any recommendations with the data from this study that schools might use to improve their relationships with families of students with different learning abilities. And so, yes, absolutely. That is definitely our intention, is to use this data to help support educators in knowing how to, most effectively support and communicate with families. So we do have one more phase of research. I'll talk about that in a moment, that I think can help, will kind of get us to that more recommendation phase, but I really appreciate that. And I think we have time for one more question. So I'm going to toggle over and see. Let's see, how do we, and I'm going to ask this question from Sylvia. And Sylvia, so happy you've joined. So she asks, with labels, push-ins, and pullouts for kids who learn differently, a sense of belonging and emotional well-being is critical. How do we get knowledge to parents of the resources available to them to support their children outside of school? And thank you for that question. We did hear from parents that they are eager and interested in more supports that they can have at home. And we also heard, both qualitatively and quantitatively about the barriers for the parents who haven't received a diagnosis. A lot of times it's just they don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. I don't know, Pam or Bethiel, if you want to speak to that question, but I think that's an important one and an opportunity for the field.
Yeah, and maybe that as you kind of go into next steps, Bib, this might be something that we can explore a little bit more in the next phase of research.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for these incredible questions. We have some more. We'll try and get them written up and answered to the owners. But for now, given the time, we're going to switch to next steps, because we do have some asks of everyone on this call, and want to share with you kind of these next phases. So if we can go to the next slide. I don't know, Pam, if you're still driving. Oh,
I'm not.
Thank you. No, thank you, Dawn, for doing that. So as you can see, our phase 4, we have 3 focus groups left to conduct. And we designed the study in this way very purposefully. So we do this deep qualitative research, we do this massive quantitative research. The quantitative always seems to surface more questions than a lot of more questions that we don't have answers to. So this gives us an opportunity to go back and very deeply sort of peel the onion around a couple of concepts or themes that emerged in the focus in the quantitative to help sort of unpack some of what we learned. So the request for everyone on this call to reach out to us is to help us, what from this data do you want to learn more about, or what should we be probing and going deeper on within these 3 focus groups, which we are holding in mid to end of March. So not a lot of time. And you can use this email address, playbook@learningheroes.org, to provide us with your comments, thoughts, suggestions, wonderings. I mean, we really want this to be actionable for the field and for you. So knowing what you would like to learn will be really helpful for us. And along those lines, our final phase, as you can see here, is a communications playbook. And what we mean by that is, how do you make all of this data actionable? So what the heck do you do with it, right? It's just a bunch of data. So our Senior Vice President David Park, mastermind communicator, he and his team, Howard and Kelsey and others, are going to put together this playbook. So there'll be infographics and videos and messaging help and lots of different rich tools that you can take to actually apply in your communications with families who have children who learn differently. So if you have thoughts about what would be helpful in that kind of communications playbook, again, you can send us your thoughts and suggestions at playbook@learningheroes.org, and we'll be releasing that in mid-April. So more to come on that as well. So thank you all so much for this incredible time together, and for all of the parents who joined, and for Pam and her work, and Bethiel, your leadership on this. We've just been so grateful. So with that, and for all the great questions, more ahead, and very eager to stay connected with all of you. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful afternoon. Really appreciate your time today.